Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to compile SCSS and SASS with Hugo. Hugo actually supports this out of the box. You don't need to install any third-party plugins or programs to access this ability. All you have to do is make sure you have Hugo Extended installed. If you're not sure how to install Hugo Extended, I'll leave a link below to my course on installing Hugo and all the other software that you'll need in your workflow. So you're trying to build SCSS with Bootstrap. If that's the case, I'll leave a link above in the card or below in the description to my course on Bootstrap and SCSS. It's much more specific than this tutorial. This tutorial is just a basic generic starter on how to set up Hugo for SCSS and SASS. So let's assume you've got Hugo and Visual Studio Code set up, and you'll also need some basic knowledge of SCSS or SASS. If you need help setting up Hugo and Visual Studio Code, I've got my Getting Started with Hugo video. And you'll have to download the template with the link in the description. I'll show you that on the next slide. And on completion of this video, you should be able to import SCSS or SASS, compile to CSS, and create development and production environment specific parameters so you can customize what happens in those different environments. Before we continue, a quick message from the sponsor of today's video. Skillshare is offering you 1 month free membership. There's no commitment minimum. You can leave whenever you like. I've actually got a bunch of courses on Skillshare. I develop full-length courses for Skillshare. You can actually watch all my courses for free for 1 month. This particular course is on SCSS compiling. I've used Bootstrap as an example framework. We're not just compiling SCSS, we're also prefixing, we're also shrinking down the file to remove excessive classes. We're using variables to modify the CSS output. We're fingerprinting for cache busting and security. All kinds of things going on there. It's quite a big full-length course. As you can see, it goes for 1 hour 44. So if you want to learn more, click on the link and I'll see you guys on Skillshare. So before you get started, you'll need to download the template with the source code so you can start this tutorial. You have to go down to the description and you'll find a link to the Getting Started code. And once you've clicked that link, you can then download the zip file and extract it, and then we'll get started. So before we set up Hugo for compiling SCSS or SASS, let's go ahead and set up the project so we've got the right files in the right places. And I'm also going to show you where I've put the example code in the template so you can import that, and then from there we'll go ahead and we'll do the compiling in Hugo. So I highly recommend you open up the code in Visual Studio Code, but you can use any code editor of your choice. The main thing you'll notice that's different to a Hugo project that doesn't compile SASS or SCSS or JavaScript is we've got an assets folder. And we need to use assets because when we're retrieving the file to process it, you have to have it stored in an assets folder for Hugo to access the file. So open up the assets folder and you'll see some files that I've included there for you. We've got main.scss, which is blank for now, and you'll see _grid.scss and _demo.scss. You're probably wondering, why does the main.scss file not have an underscore, and why does demo and grid have an underscore? And the reason being is by placing an underscore at the start of an SCSS or SASS file, you're indicating that that file isn't intended to be imported into the SASS compiler. It's only intended to be imported into another SCSS file. So by looking in this folder straight away, we know that the main.scss file is the file that we need to compile, and these aren't designed to be compiled individually. So what we have to do, have a quick look at the files first. The grid.scss, it's some SCSS which is used for setting up some CSS grid for displaying columns on websites with rows and columns that are of particular widths. We've got a bunch of different functions in here that loop over content and do other great things. Here we've got some variables for the grid sizes. Now I'm only including this for demonstration purposes. I'm not trying to teach you how to use this particular SCSS file. And we've got a demo.scss, and that's just got some styles which are used for demonstration purposes as well. So we're adding some color to our grid. So we'll go into main.scss and we'll import these two files. So we'll type in @import, use some inverted commas, and we'll start with grid. Now you don't need to put the underscore in, and you don't need to type in .scss either. By default, the compiler will look for .scss or .sass for you. You must use a semicolon at the end. We'll go to the next line and we'll import, and this time we'll import demo. Then we'll use a semicolon at the end and we'll save that. So now we're ready to set up Hugo for compiling. So now we're going to set up a basic import of SCSS using Hugo. I'll start by showing you the docs so you can see how it works, and I'll put the link below to the docs. So here's the Hugo docs page on SASS and SCSS. It actually isn't that useful because it doesn't show you how to get this compiled code into a tag in your HTML. So let's go ahead and we'll copy the basics here. We'll go back into our project and then we'll navigate into the layouts folder and partials and the head.html. It's just a really basic template, which is just a default template which you get when you create a new Hugo theme. So we'll paste in what we've got there. You'll notice they're referring to a SASS folder. I've called mine SCSS because there's no SASS in it. And the file definitely is main.scss referring to. So that's getting the file, and it's getting the file out of the resources folder, and that's why we need to store everything in that assets folder. We've then got style, and style equals the resource that we've just got out of the assets folder, and then we're using toCSS to then compile it, and this is built in with Hugo Extended. You must have Hugo Extended installed or this will not work. We can actually shorten this. If we take out, because we've already used resources up here, we can take out resources and use a lowercase t, and it actually shortens our code for us. We'll save that. Then we have to insert it into a tag. So we'll use link :c, and then Emmet will come up. Emmet's included by default in Visual Studio Code with a CSS. If you use link on its own, it's not as useful. Make sure you use the :c or :css. We've then got to override the file. So what we'll do, we'll highlight the file, we'll back it out, we'll put in two curly braces, and we're going to refer to our style variable. And we want to refer to a link to that file. So we can use .permalink or .rel permalink. I'm going to do .rel permalink just so we've got a shorter file name. We're then going to close those curly brackets. There is one more thing you can do to make this a little bit more simple, is we could get rid of SASS and style, and then we'll call it just CSS. We'll make it really simple. So we'll hold down Alt and we'll click on those next to the $3 signs. We'll put in CSS, and then we will get rid of the semicolon there. So on our first line, we're declaring the variable CSS. CSS there as well. We're then declaring that CSS is equal to itself, but we are going to run it through toCSS. We're then referring to it down here with a relative permalink to this file here that we've been making. Let's save that. Let's run Hugo server and see how it ends up. So we will run a new terminal and we'll type in Hugo server. You can control click the link, and you'll see we've got our grid displayed. Let's turn off those imports and we'll see the difference. So we'll go into our main.scss, we'll highlight those two lines, we'll use Control or Command KC to comment them. We'll save it, you'll see Hugo's reloaded. And we've got a big long list of column names. We'll just view the page source, and you can see we've got col6, col6, col4, and so on. And that's just running all the way down the page. There's no columns or rows set up. We'll re-enable our grid. We'll highlight those two lines. We'll do Control or Command KU to uncomment. We'll save it. We'll see Hugo's reloaded. And it's now lined up with columns and rows. We've also got that color styling with our demo module that we've imported as well. If you right click on one of the columns and inspect, you can have a look at the code and you'll see how it's working. We're using flex for the column width. If you scroll down, you'll actually see the rendered size of that particular row and column. If we go back up to the actual row, you'll see that the whole row is being highlighted, not just the column. So it depends which div you're selecting. But that's not really the purpose of this tutorial. This tutorial is all about importing and compiling SCSS. This is just an example file. So now we get to set up Hugo with some development and production parameters. We want different things to happen in different environments. For example, when we're developing, we want source maps enabled and we don't want to compress our code or minify it. We want to be able to read it easily. Whereas in production, we don't need source maps. We want to minify or compress our code, remove all the new lines and all the white space to keep the file size as small as possible so it downloads faster and the user can load pages quicker. So we start with our basic code. If you read up the top, it says that you can also provide arguments, which are an object and a map of the options listed below. So right on the bottom, we've got an example of how you can include the options as a map. And in Hugo Maps, you actually have to use a dict or a dictionary, and that's how you provide a map. So we'll use this exact same code here, but we're going to use some different options for production and for development. The first one we're going to set is transpiler. Hugo currently uses libsass. Dartsass is the current preferred compiler for SAS and SCSS. Libsass has been depreciated, but Hugo doesn't currently support it out of the box, and installing it's quite complicated. So we're going to use libsass, which is the default, but we're going to declare that just so that when Hugo does update to Dartsass, we don't have breaking changes, because you will see as we go through these that the options are slightly different for libsass and Dartsass. So we'll start setting this up. We'll go into the partials folder and head.html. You can see the code we've already written there. What we'll do is we're going to create a conditional statement. So we'll go down to CSS and we'll refer to a variable called opts. And then further up, before all that takes place, we will declare that variable. Now, when we declare it, we will start off with the production options. So we'll do opts and then we'll do colon equals. And that's for when we declare it. And we have to start with a dict. So we open and close brackets, and inside those brackets we write dict. And let's go through and we'll start with our first option, which is transpiler. So we'll start with some inverted commas, transpiler, and then you put in a space. So transpiler is the property and the value will be libsass. You just separate them with spaces. So that's for production. Let's copy that. We'll add more options in a minute. Then below it, we'll put in two more curly braces and we'll do an if statement, a conditional statement. And we're going to do if eq, so it's if equals hugo.environment with a capital E. And if we're in development, so if the Hugo environment is equal to development, we'll tab in, we'll paste in that code, but we have to remove the colon. Really important. You cannot declare twice. We're now modifying. And then we'll put in a new line and we'll do backspace to get back to the original indentation and we'll end. So we've declared opts and that's what it is, but if we're in the development environment, it'll be overwritten with these values. And then the code actually takes place and we're pulling in the opts down here, depending on which environment we're in. Let's now go ahead, look through the options and we'll set them up. So we've set our transpiler and that doesn't change. We won't worry about target path yet. Now output style, by default it's nested and that's for development, but we are going to use compressed for production. Let's go and set that now. Output style with a capital S. So we don't need to worry about development, but in production, we're going to use output style and then compressed. Make sure you leave a space between these. And Hugo will know that they come in pairs. Property, value, property, value. That's how dict or maps work. Let's check out the next option. So don't worry about precision. Enable source maps, however. Source maps aren't enabled by default, so let's go through for development and enable them. So we'll go into our development code and put in some more inverted commas. You gotta be careful you spell this correctly. It's enable source with a capital S and then map. There are no plurals present at all. And that's going to be a true. You don't need to use inverted commas, and you can't use inverted commas because true is Boolean. It's either true or false. It's not a string. So it doesn't have inverted commas around it. Let's go back to our list of options. Now the last option is include paths. And if you're using node.js or npm, you'll need to pull some source files, SCSS or SASS, out of the node modules folder. By default, Hugo will not know to look in there. So we'll set that up, and you'll notice for include paths, I'll just highlight it here, it's actually using, you've got include paths, that's your property, but the actual value, you've got to provide a slice. Let's go through that and I'll show you how to do it step by step. It is a little bit complicated if you haven't done it before, and it won't work if you don't provide a slice. It's a string slice. Let's go through and do that. So we're going to set it up the same for both development and production. So what we'll do, we'll hold down the Alt key and we'll click on both. And the property is include paths. Then we'll put a space in, and you have to open bracket, type in slice, and then inside the slice we can provide multiple strings. And the string you'll probably most likely need is node underscore modules. And that will tell libsass to look in the node modules folder. So you wanted to look in other additional folders, you would just put a space in and you'd put in folder 2 or whatever it is. That's how a slice works. You provide strings separated by spaces, but we don't want to do that. We just want to have the one for now, but it must be in a slice, and it's not necessary for today's example, but it is necessarily if you're using node modules. So we'll save that. If you haven't already got Hugo server running, run it, and we'll check out the results. We're currently, if you're using the command Hugo server, you'll be in the development environment. I'll just cancel mine and we'll run it again, and I'll show you where it tells you. So after you run Hugo server, if you look carefully, it says environment development, and it reminds you that's the environment you're in. You can actually customize that and change that behavior. So if I right click and inspect, this all comes out of the main.css file that's been compiled. If we go into the head, you'll see we're operating out of main.css. And if we scroll down and look at one of the divs, you'll notice it tells us where we can find each style. So that first style, the background color, it's telling us that's actually in demo.scss. And then the row class is coming out of grid.scss, and that's because we have source maps enabled. Let's go into the sources tab, open up our CSS file, scroll to the bottom, and you'll see there's an instruction there to tell the browser where to find the source map, and that's what the source map does. If we look at a particular element, it tells us where you can find each bit of code. You can even click on it and it will even go into the source for you and show you the exact source that you've put in SCSS. It's really powerful, and that's why we've used source maps for development. However, it's not necessary for production. And in production, you're not going to be shipping the source with it anyway, so it's not going to work. So that's why we've disabled it in production. We'll then go and have a look at the main.css. You'll notice there's lots of new lines and white space, and it's formatted really neat and it's really easy to read, and that's great. But when we're going to ship this code and upload it to through an FTP software to a server, we want all this white space and new lines gone to keep the file size down. So let's run just the Hugo command. We'll build the site and we'll have a look at the result and we'll see how it's being compressed. So we'll use Control-C to kill that service. We'll then run just the command called Hugo, and you'll see it's building the site, and we've got 2 static files there. It's created a sitemap and did that in 60 milliseconds. It's so fast. Have a look. You should have a new folder called public, and that's our actual site. That's the site you can upload. Obviously this is just for demonstration purposes, so it hasn't been really built that well. But open up index.html and you'll see we're linking to /SCSS/main.css. So we'll go into that folder, the SCSS folder. We'll open up main.css, and you'll notice that there's no more new lines and there's no white space at all. It's been bunched right up. It's pretty much one long continual line. Everything's been placed on there, and that's been done so that you're keeping the file size down so the user can load the page much faster, especially if they're on a mobile device or they're on slow internet. It makes things work, you know, maybe 20% or faster or so. It's definitely worth it. But luckily, when we're using the development environment with Hugo Server, we don't have to deal with these files that are very hard to read. So now we're going to have a look at moving the code that we've just created for compiling the SCSS or SASS files to a partial, so we can then reuse that code for compiling different source files. You might have a file for script you've written, SCSS or SASS that you've written. You may have a file for vendors where you're pulling in someone else's code. You might be separating that. Let's have a look at using a partial so we don't have to repeat what we've just done. So we'll go into the partials folder and we'll make a new file and we'll call it libsass.html. We'll then go back into the head, and everything that you've just written, you have to highlight that, and we'll do Command or Control X to remove it. And then we'll save our head.html, so there's nothing in there at the moment. We'll then paste that into libsass.html and we'll save it. Let's then go back to head.html. We'll put in 2 curly brackets and we'll run partial and then some inverted commas, and we're going to run libsass. Now you don't need to put .html in. Hugo will automatically look for that. You then have to put in a dot and a space, and that provides the entire pages and the site's context to that partial. We'll save that, we'll run Hugo Server, and then we'll have a look at how we can customize it further. So type in Hugo Server and we'll control click the link and we'll make sure everything works. So that's looking great. You're probably wondering, but how does that help me use that code for other SCSS files? So let's go through now and we'll customize it now that we've got it working. So what we'll do, we'll go into our libsass and we'll see here where we're referring to the particular resource. We will highlight that and we'll do Control or Command X to remove it, and we'll put a dot in its place. You're probably wondering, how does that work? So we'll save our libsass.html. We'll go back to where we're calling the partial, and we'll place the path relative to the assets folder in its place. So what's happening now is when we call this libsass partial, and the reason why we're calling it libsass is because we've actually chosen to use libsass as the transpiler, which is the current one, and we don't want breaking changes, so that this will work, you know, for the foreseeable future, even if things change. And then the context that's being provided to that partial is this particular string, the location of the file we want to transpile. And then when we go into the partial, we're getting a resource, and the resource we're getting, we've just put a dot, which basically means the context, everything. But the only thing we've provided is this string. So that's how we're going to access the string. It's actually quite powerful with Hugo contexts. It's also quite complex, and this is just the bare basics of it. So we'll save that and we'll check it out and we'll make sure it works. So it looks like it's still working. We'll just go and inspect, and we're still pulling in our source, which is great. I'll show you now how you can make an additional SCSS file and we can reuse the code. So we're not going to touch libsass.html anymore. What we will do is we'll go back into our assets folder and we'll just create a file for now, and we'll call it footer.scss. And inside there we'll do dot footer. And we'll open that up and we'll do display block. It's just a basic example. Background color, we'll do it black for now so it stands out. And then we're going to do our footer text. So we'll leave a line and we'll do and underscore underscore text. Now, I'm not going to teach you about the BEM methodology, but we're just going to do a basic example based on it. And you'll see how this all compiles in a second. So our footer text, we're using dot footer, and the and, because we're nesting inside dot footer, we're going to end up with dot footer underscore underscore text. If you put your mouse over it, you'll see Visual Studio Code is smart enough to work out what this all means, and it's actually going to create a class called footer underscore underscore text for us. We'll use double underscores so it's clear that it's an element that exists inside dot footer. So our text, the color of our text, we'll make it white, so it'll be hash FFFFFF and a semicolon. And then we'll save it. We'll go back into our index.html. At the bottom of the page, we'll just put it down the bottom just to make it simple. We'll do div.footer and tab. And then inside that, we'll do div.footer underscore underscore text. And then we'll write some text. Footer text in white. And then we'll go back into our head and we'll copy our partial text, and we'll go back in, and this time we're going to be importing footer.scss. You'll notice I don't have an underscore in it, and that's because footer.scss is designed to be imported with a compiler. So we'll save that. You notice we're reusing our libsass code for both of these SCSS files that we're creating. You should already have your Hugo server running, but if you don't, run Hugo server. And then we've got our block, our black block, and we've got our footer text in white. I'm not going to go too much further into styling it. It's not the purpose of this tutorial. If you want to get into CSS quickly, I recommend you check out my Bootstrap tutorials. And if you find this step too complicated or challenging, I have provided a version of the source code for this completed tutorial without step 5, without target path. So you'll see that in the description below. Otherwise, do your best to give it a go. I think it's a great learning experience. So this part's getting into advanced Hugo territory, but it's well worth watching and learning how it all happens. So by default, Hugo, if you don't set target path, Hugo will use the path that you provide and it will replace the extension with .css. So if we provided /scss/main.scss, we'll end up with a main.css, but it's in the SCSS folder. And that doesn't look very good. So what we're going to do, we're going to write a quick script that will extract the word main and put it into a CSS folder. So let's do that. So I'll open up the libsass.html partial, and after transpile libsass, hold down the Alt key and click on both your development and your production options. Put in a space and we will type in targetPath with a capital P. Now because we're using this partial for multiple files, we can't manually assign the target path. We have to set up a script that automates the process. And we'll assign that to a variable called targetPath with a capital P. Make sure you start it with a $sign. We'll then head up the top and we will use our curly brackets and we will assign target path colon equals, and we'll assign it just to the dot. And that's the path we've provided to the partial. And we'll save that. I'm just going to put a comment in there real quick. I recommend you put this on your code too, because it's going to get complicated fast. And that's how we comment in Hugo. We use the two curly braces. We start with a slash star and we end with the star slash. So we're assigning the path to the target path variable. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to perform a number of checks. And what we're checking for is SCSS slash or SASS slash at the start of our path. And at the end of the path, we're checking for dot SCSS or dot SASS at the end of the path. And if those things are either SCSS or slash or SASS is true and either dot SCSS or dot SASS at the end is true, we're then going to continue and manipulate that path so our file ends up in a CSS folder. And we could use regex to do that, but there is a slightly simpler way we can do that in Hugo, and it means you don't have to learn regex. So we'll start with I'll show you how that works. We'll start with an if statement. We'll do if and, because we're going to check for, you'll notice we've got the keyword and in the middle. So we'll start with our SCSS and SASS at the start. So we'll open up a bracket and we'll do has prefix. Make sure you use a capital P. We're then going to provide target path. So we're checking inside target path, which we've just assigned to the path. We're looking for OR. You'll notice we've got OR up here. So we'll open and close our brackets, put in OR, and then we can just copy and paste in these two words. We'll have to remove the word OR, obviously, because of the way Hugo syntax works, but that's pretty much ready to go. Then for these final two, we're going to leave a space. It's so important you put a space in here because we've got this block here, and for and to work, we need a space before our next block. So this time we're using strings dot and then capital has, capital H for has, suffix. It's slightly different to has prefix, just the way Hugo's been written. And again, we will pass through target path. We'll then do an OR, and this time we're going to be checking for the following characters at the end. So we'll paste that in. We'll get rid of the keyword OR between them. I'm just going to put a space before the closing curly brackets to make it easy to read. So make sure you've got that spot on or it's not going to work. We'll then leave a space and put an end tag. So we're running our checks. We're checking for these two, either of these two at the start. We're looking for either of these two at the end. Then what we're going to do, if that is the case, and it's important we run these checks first so we're actually editing the right path, we're going to return the string, the target path, but we're going to start at the 6th character, which is, if you look here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're starting after the slash, if it's SCSS or SASS. And we're going to remove the last 5 characters. And if you look at the end, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters, including the dot. And there's a really easy way to do that in Hugo. And what you do, put in our curly braces, and we'll start with target path equals, and we're going to use a function called substr. And we're going to pass target path into substr. And I'll leave a link to the docs for substr. So the way it works is you provide a string and we're providing target path. You then tell it where you want to start printing from and the length. The length's a bit tricky. Now you'll notice if we provide 0 for the starting point, that's the first character. So it's like an index. If you provide 1, it'll start at the 2nd character. In terms of length, you can provide an overall length, but we don't know that. But if we use a negative, it says here, if the length given is a negative, that number of characters will be omitted from the end of the string. So if you provide 0, it starts printing from the first character. You provide -1, it takes off 1 character from the end. Provide 1 as the first character, and you end up on the second digit, and then provide -1, it takes 1 off the end. So let's apply those principles. So we'll start printing from the 6th character, which means we provide a 5. We want to remove the last 5 characters, so then we do -5. So now we've got everything in our path except we've removed our folder from the start, we removed our file extension at the end. We've now got to create a CSS folder, and we've got to create a CSS file extension. So we'll put a comment in, and I highly recommend you put these comments in as you go, or you'll probably get a little bit confused when you come back to your code down the track. So we're going to get our target path variable again, and we'll make it equal printf, and I'll leave the doc for printf below. It's quite a complex one. And we're going to put in like a template, and it's going to be CSS / and we're going to use %s as a placeholder, .css. And that %s is for a string, and the string is going to be target path. So our file name, which we've extracted, we could have used regex or something else, but I think it's much easier for beginners to use the has prefix and the has suffix and the substr. We've extracted our file name, we've then placed it right in the middle there. So we'll save that, and we'll run Hugo server, and we'll check it out. So it's still working. We'll go and do an inspect, and we'll look in the head, and you'll see it's now pulling in main.css in the CSS folder and footer.css in the CSS folder. So that's been automated with a reusable partial, so our code's much easier to deal with. We'll then go into sources, and we'll see we've got a CSS folder, and we've got our 2 files in there. That's much better than a SCSS folder or a SASS folder, given that it's not really SASS or SCSS anymore, it's CSS that's been outputted. Let's now go back through and we'll look at tidying up our code further. So you'll notice both development and production, they both have transpiler libsass, they both have target path is a target path variable, and they both have include paths node modules. So let's we'll highlight include paths, and we'll place it at the start, and we'll go back to our development options, and we'll paste in at the start again. And notice we've got quite a lot of similarity there. Here's how we can clean it up so that we don't have any duplication of code. What we'll do is we'll make a new variable, and we'll call it common opts. We'll do colon equals for defining it, and we'll start by highlighting all of that, and we'll copy and paste it in. We'll close the bracket, and then we'll go down into our production options, and we'll delete that out, and we'll go into our development options, and we'll delete it out. But we need to now merge those 2 maps or dictionaries together. And what we do is we use the function merge, and we're going to merge common opts and then our dict, and we'll do that below as well. We're going to merge common opts and dict. So we've only got to provide our common options once, and then for production we're merging our common ops with output style compressed, and then for development we're merging our common options with enable source maps true. Let's put in some quick comments. So there's some comments. We've got our SASS options that are common to dev and production. We've got our development options. We're merging our common options. We've got our production options. We're merging our common options. We're then getting our source file and compiling it. And then we insert our link into HTML. Again, I highly recommend you use the comments. It will make your code a lot easier to modify down the track. Let's save that, and if you haven't already, run Hugo server. And there you have it. You've got a reusable partial with no duplicated code. And we've got our file sitting in a CSS folder. Much better. And down in the description below, I've provided an option where you can download the source file for this completed tutorial with the targetPath code. And if you found this section too complicated, I've also provided an option of the completed tutorial without this last step, without the targetPath code. So that's it for this video. As usual, if you've got any comments, please put them below. I'm always trying to respond to comments as quick as I can. I really enjoy talking to my subscribers. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel to get regular updates. Hit that bell button, and I'll see you in the next video.